Hey there, storytellers. Mary Rose Wood here. It's 1 p.m. Pacific time on Wednesday, which is our live stream time where we talk about story structure, writing craft, and the mindset of the working, thriving writer. And today we're going to talk about, a word I made up, to be honest with you. And that word is procrastination. And if it sounds a little bit like procrastination, I intend it to. Prodraftination is kind of a cross between drafting and procrastination. And what I mean by it is that many writers who procrastinate don't find themselves able to get to work at all. But writers who prodraftinate find ways in their drafting process to actually use what looks like drafting their work to procrastinate from doing what the real job is, which is to make up what happens next. So in a sense, what we're talking about today is how writers make up what happens and then what happens next and what happens after that. And if you're a fiction writer, you know in your heart of hearts that this is at the very core of your job. And yet it's sometimes difficult. And writers find it easier. Some writers do. Many writers do, to make up the words rather than the what happens. So today I want to talk about how to work on the what happens, how to make it up, how to know what happens next, how to stop prodraftinating. So I hope this topic is of interest. I'm glad to see folks here live. And oh, hey, Anne, I'm waving to you. Hi, greetings from where I am to where you are. I see some other folks here live. And so let me just say, of course, that this is a live stream, and I certainly welcome your comments, your questions, your thoughts. Please feel free to share them in the comments as we go. We'll weave them in if it seems relevant and pertinent. And if you're watching the replay, I want you to do the same thing. I want you to leave comments. Let me know what's on your mind. Did you have other questions? Did this topic, illuminate something for you? Is there something else you'd like me to talk about in the future? I'm all ears. And that's why we have the comment section. All right. So we're going to talk about this question of how we can actually decide or make up what happens next when we sit to write fiction and when we're actually working on our drafts. Before we get started, let me introduce myself, because some of you may be new to this live stream. My name is Mary Rose Wood. I am an author. I've written 14 middle grade novels. They're what I'm best known for, all published by Big Five publishers. So I've had a long and interesting career as a writer. And even prior to writing fiction, I've written screenplays, I've written for the theater, I've performed improv, I've worked as a performer, as an actor. I've had just basically spent my whole adult life in the storytelling arts. And so this exploration of the creative process, essentially how we make stuff up, is it's not really near and dear to me in terms of the stuff that interests me. It's who I am, and it's what I've spent my life playing around with. And I have to bear that in mind, because sometimes questions come up from writers who are newer to the idea of making stuff up. And it sometimes takes me by surprise, because to me, making stuff up is like what life is all about. It's an improv all day long, right? So I want to talk about that a little bit today. And I want to share that this is really what inspired today's talk. I am the founder of Path of the Storyteller, which is my own platform for training and mentoring writers. And we have a wonderful alumni group called Storytellers Circle for people who've been through the Path of the Storyteller program, and they want to, stay a community and continue to get mentorship and support each other, develop their work within the context of all the study of story structure and writing craft that they've gotten from Path of the Storyteller. And we talk about some really interesting things every week when we meet. And we had a talk about creativity and how we actually make stuff up. And the fact that the question was posed was a real eye-opener to me. And I'm really grateful for the group for posing this question, because to me, this is a normal thing that people do, right? When we are children, nobody really has to teach us how to make stuff up. We exist in a kind of an imaginative dreamscape, playing is how our brains develop. Those of you who are educators, those of you who are parents, you know this to be true. Making stuff up, imaginative play, is at the core of how we grow into our full intellectual capacity, our full emotional capacity. It's really our birthright. And so when a writer says, well, I get stuck on the making stuff up part, I sort of take a deep breath and I say, okay, that's your birthright. So the question is, how, in a sense, not how do we do it, but how do we not get in the way of ourselves doing it? Where did we lose our facility, our ease, our pleasure, our joy in making stuff up? And it's a very important question, not just, theoretically, but for all you storytellers out there, especially those of you who write fiction, storytelling, encompasses a lot of different types of writing, because even if we're writing based on true events, we still shape it into a narrative. That's how it's coherent and impactful to the reader. So, let me not rule out that some of this material might be of value to writers who are writing memoir or, nonfiction of various forms. But either way, a huge part of your ease and pleasure in the work and your productivity as a writer is how at home you feel about the process of making stuff up. So that's really what we're going to look at today. And we're going to look at how a lack of ease with making stuff up can cause us to prodraftinate, by which I mean drafting as a way to avoid our discomfort with actually making up the story. All right, that's our topic. I think it's interesting. And if you've got thoughts about it or questions, you can start to pose them anytime. So I'm going to give you today some very practical tools. We're going to look at 5 specific questions that you can ask yourself to help you make stuff up, to help you know that what you are writing, what you're drafting is useful material, that you're using the process of drafting productively and appropriately, rather than as a kind of a fancy way of procrastinating actually working on your book. So we're going to have 5 questions. Oh, I think actually it's 6. I think I came up with the 6th one. So as we go through, there'll be 6, and I'll give you a couple of red flags to watch out for as well. Okay, so stick around. We're going to have a lot of very actionable content today. I just want to give you a little disclaimer beforehand. When I give you questions to ask yourself, I don't want you to say, oh, she told me to ask myself blah, 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 but I don't know the answer. I fail. This is really at the core of what we're talking about today. If I ask you, and you're the writer, a question, say, about what your main character wants, which I am going to use as one of my questions to ask yourself, and you say, well, I don't know. Hang on, friend. I'm not asking you to get it right. This isn't a test that you can fail. You are the one who makes it up. You are the maker-upper. And this position of being the one who makes it up, it's like, don't look over one shoulder and then the other, like waiting for someone else to make it up. You being the writer means that you're the one that makes it up. So these are basically improv prompts. They're creative prompts, suggestions to get your creative juices flowing. They're not a test that you can fail. It's not failable. You're the one making it up. Okay, so I hope that that's clear. It's really interesting that I feel that I have to explain that, but I worked with a lot of writers over a lot of years, and there is this tendency for some of us to drag our habits from our schooling into our adult activities. And we can very easily get triggered back into this idea that, we're being tested, that if someone asks us a question, it's not a true inquiry about what we think or what we want. It's a test that we somehow have to come up with the right thing to say, or we failed somehow. So I ask you all to take a deep breath, drop all that stuff, because we are now entering the land of making up, and it's nothing but fun. And I also want to take a moment to define the word drafting. Now, I have done a live stream talk about what drafting is, and you can go check that out. But just in the context of this discussion, when I say drafting, I mean drafting. You're going from blank page to not blank page. We're not revising. We're not judging what we've got. This is in no way a finished product. We don't know anything yet. We are drafting to find out. That's what we're doing. We're drafting to find out. It's not going to look anything like a finished book. It could look like a journal entry. It could look like free writing. It could look like a grocery list. It could look like, word clouds. They make those word clouds now that, just kind of pull out words. It could look like anything you need it to look like. It's the difference between having paper with nothing on it and you starting to draw your creative ideas out of your brain, your fantastic creative brain, and putting it down. That's drafting. It's impossible to get it wrong. The only thing that I feel that we can, do quote unquote wrong about drafting is what I want to talk about today, which is that we sort of avoid drafting by procrastinating. All right. So let's get into it. We're just gonna make stuff up and we're gonna sort of plug into that. Hopefully, let's uncomplicate how complicated writers can make this idea, this birthright that we have, this creative birthright. All right. You knew how to do it when you were born, and you still know how to do it. I guarantee you. All right. So let's go through our 5 questions. First one, what does your hero want? This is a super simple question, but it's also a really profound question because ultimately, later on, when you're shaping your draft into something a little bit more polished, knowing what your hero wants is going to be the thing that enables you to apply story structure technique. Your hero is going to have something to do in your story as a whole. But chances are, and I speak from my long experience as a writer here, chances are when you first begin to sit down and work on your book, you're not going to know exactly what the big thing your hero wants might be. You might know. You might have a pretty full-fledged idea that I have a character who is swept far from home by a Kansas tornado, and what she's going to want is to get home again. That's her big want. You might know that before you sit down to write that story. But maybe that's not how you begin. Maybe you begin with the idea that I have a character and she lives in this kind of interesting landscape. I'm sort of interested in writing about a life on a farm and she's going to be there and, I think she's the only kid and maybe she has a dog. And okay, so now you're just kind of riffing on this. Maybe you don't have the whole big mission yet. In the early days of drafting, we're looking, we're just trying to find out. So when I say, what does your hero want? You may say, I don't know yet. That's what I have to write the draft to find out. And I'm going to be like, okay, settle down, friend, settle down. What about what your hero might want in a scene? Just in this scene. If you really feel like writing something today, let's figure out what your hero might want in this scene. I believe it was Kurt Vonnegut who famously said, make sure your hero wants something, even if it's just a glass of water. Now, this is really useful advice when writing a scene, because if you feel like writing something, give your hero something to want, and you can draft, you can improvise, you can play, you can discover, you can make stuff up. The minute we have a character who wants something, we can begin to make stuff up because there's an objective. If the hero wants something, chances are they're going to do something about it. And in fact, it's our job to make sure they do. So the only rule that I want to give you about this is that when you ask yourself a question, like our number 1 question, what does your hero want? Even if you decide, well, my hero wants An ice cream? Maybe. That's fine. That's like a little bit better than Vonnegut's glass of water. I'll go with ice cream. Make sure that it's specific and not just my hero wants not to be bored, or my hero wants to feel better, or my hero wants to feel happy. We all want those things. We all want to feel better, and we don't want to be bored, and we want to be happy, but they're not specific enough to be useful for us creatively. So wanting an ice cream can set a scene in motion in a very particular way, whereas wanting not to be bored, it doesn't give us anything to work on. So our first rule, really our only rule, is to just don't allow yourself to be generic, be specific. Now, right away, we're in the land of making stuff up, right? Because the writer who says, oh, I can't think of anything, they can't even think of, I want an ice cream. Oh, I find that hard to believe. What's holding that writer back, I would predict, is that they think that they have to pick the right answer. What if my hero doesn't want an ice cream? What if they want a new pair of shoes? What if they, what if they want to go out to the playground and play on the swings? Like, maybe I've picked the wrong thing. Please remember how we started. If you're the one making it up, you're the one who gets to decide what the right answer is. And when we're drafting, it doesn't matter, because we're trying to find stuff. We're exploring creatively. So let's just stick with ice cream for now, shall we? So that's what we want to do. We want to pick something that our hero wants, and now we can actually get to work. That's the first question. Later, it'll be the big want. It will come into clarity, and I will talk about that later. The second question I want you to ask yourself, once you've decided on what your hero wants, perhaps only for this scene, only for today, only for this little bit of drafting that you are going to do, is why do they want it? Why do they want it? So this becomes a really interesting question, because you've already decided that your hero wants ice cream. And then I say, well, why do they want ice cream? Think about this for a minute. You might say, well, they want ice cream because they like ice cream, but that's a little generic. What if I say no specific? Remember, that's our one rule here. They want ice cream because they just lost a tennis match that they were really looking forward to winning. They really wanted to win it. Maybe there was a scholarship attached to it, a sports scholarship to college. Oh, interesting. And they lost, and they feel bad, and they want ice cream to cheer them up. But wait a minute, what did we just decide? Oh, scholarship to college. Well, so they want to go to college, huh? They don't have the money to pay for it. They need a sports scholarship. Interesting. Oh, why don't they have the money to pay for it? Well, maybe this is the truth of their family. Maybe there was a family business and it just went under. Do you see how much stuff I just made up? Now, I literally just did that live here while talking to you, because anytime you allow yourself to be specific and then ask why, it's going to give you more. It's going to give you the stuff that you've just made up, right? It is you making stuff up by productively asking questions of yourself. So from this random selection of I'd like ice cream, we now have a young person who wants to go to college, who needs a sports scholarship. She's really good at tennis. She just played a high stakes match, but she lost. So now she's not sure she's going to get the scholarship that she needs. I mean, how much did we just make up? Quite a lot. And it was simply by saying, what does your hero want and why do they want it? So this is why I say never be afraid to invent something small, because from a single scoop of ice cream, you can start to get a peek into a psychology, into a person. You can start to really make up a character who's got a lot going on. So the first question, what does your hero want? The second question, why do they want it? Right? This is going to open the window to understanding your hero. Really cool. Third question, knowing what they want and knowing why they want it, what stands in their way. So now we've got a character who wants ice cream. What stands in the way of her getting it? Now, listen, this may seem schematic in a way. What stands in her way? Oh, we always have to have what stands in her way. Why can't we just write about ice cream? Why can't we just write about how great ice cream is for a few pages? You know why? Because that's procrastination. What we want to do is we want to activate our hero by making it a journey filled with obstacles that she has to travel to get to the ice cream that we decided that she wanted. Now, these obstacles can be anything and everything. They can be some kind of external circumstance, some kind of environmental circumstance. They can be time as a factor, deadlines and urgency of all kinds is really useful in storytelling, and it's a powerful kind of obstacle to give a character in a situation. Another character might be a force of opposition, right? It might be an obstacle of some kind. They could get a flat tire on the car on their way to the ice cream parlor. There could be terrible weather. They could have a crisis of conscience on the way, about, oh, but wait a minute. I just remembered that I'm, lactose free and I don't tolerate dairy well, and I still want my ice cream, and this is going to be a problem, right? So I better go home and get my meds. You get to make it up. But what I assure you is that for any want that you give your hero, you can, if you get used to asking this question, what stands in the way? What stands in the way? Generate not one, not two, not 10, but 100 different obstacles that can stand in the way. And I encourage you to get in the habit of doing that, and not doing it generically, but doing it specifically. What stands in the way? She doesn't have money to buy an ice cream cone, perhaps. Well, let's get specific. Why doesn't she have the money? Well, she had money to get ice cream, but I don't know. Her brother borrowed it from her right before she left for her tennis match because he needed it for some, project of his own. And so now she's lent the money away, so she's got to get more. Or maybe she gets halfway to the ice cream parlor and she realizes she's forgotten her wallet. She doesn't have the money. Maybe there's another character that she meets along the way who's, has something that it wants her to do that's going to take her in the opposite direction from the ice cream parlor. Maybe the ice cream parlor is closing in 15 minutes and she knows this and she's got to get there before they close, right? It's like you can just keep riffing. And you must practice this. You must flex this muscle because you're a storyteller and inventing obstacles is your job. Your job is to come up with characters, make them want something, and then invent obstacles. This is your job. This is where plots come from. So I want to pause for a second because right away, you may have found yourself in your work as a writer being focused on other things. You might have been really interested in theme. You might have been really interested in research and world building. You might find yourself writing long descriptions. You might be besotted with nature and you might want to write a lot about your observations, You may be really interested in psychology and you want to describe a difficult family unit or something. You may write about all kinds of things. But if you haven't gotten in the habit of putting a character with a desire activated, right, by their desire to do something and then encounter obstacles, you are prodrafticating because that's the stuff where your story is going to come from. That's what every scene is made of. And that's ultimately what your story is going to rely upon. So making up obstacles is your job. It's not part of your job. It's not the footnote to your job. It's the main thing you do. And I really want you to remember that. Whatever else you're doing, if it's not putting obstacles in front of your hero, you need to consider your priorities, okay? I want to take a moment actually while we're here, because I didn't get a chance to put it up before. If you are interested in learning exactly how to design a scene that is based on this very clear process of giving your hero a rich environment, setting them in pursuit of some goal, filling the way with obstacles, and sort of learning how to escalate that until you have the structure of a scene, I have a program called Making Scenes. It's a self-paced course. It's really, really step-by-step. And you can learn more about it at this URL, www.pathofthestoryteller.com/making scenes. It's what this course is all about. So if some of the stuff I'm talking to you about today resonates and you want to know more, that's where I would love for you to go to get more information. Okay. So now we've got our first three questions. What does your hero want? Why do they want it? And what stands in the way? Super important. We're on question number 4. How does your hero meet this resistance or this opposition with action? What makes your hero the hero of your story is that they try to achieve their goal. They try to achieve their little goals in each scene, and they are going to try to achieve their big goal for the whole story. Maybe when you're drafting, especially if you're very new, if it's just the beginning of a new project, you may not yet have clarity about what that big thing is going to be. That's going to be like the spine of your whole book. But you can sure draft scenes in which your hero has small wants and acts in order to achieve them. So as soon as they meet the opposition, the question you must ask is, what does the hero do? What do they do in response to this force of opposition? They must do something. And we talk a lot, and I'm sure you've heard of this phrase, the passive hero. We talk a lot about why it's problematic to let your hero be passive. And I mean, this is why it's what your hero does that makes the what happens in a story happen. If your hero doesn't do anything, then nothing is happening. And this kind of avoidance of having the hero actively pursue their goal is like another form of prodraftination, because it's the specificity of what your hero does that's going to create the fresh force of opposition that rises up in response to that. So what we have in question 4 is this kind of dance, if you will. Your hero's got a goal. They're doing something in pursuit of it. And we've explored why, which has kind of opened up a sense of maybe who this hero is and why this goal might be important to them. A force of opposition gets in the way, and your hero does something about it. What do they do? Do they use charm? Do they use cunning? Do they outsmart the opposition? Do they overpower the opposition? Do they have to negotiate? Do they get into a war of riddles like Bilbo Baggins might with a dangerous dragon? There's all kinds of things that your hero can do when they face opposition. But what I want you to remember, that since making up obstacles is your job, they come in pairs, right? So the opposition happens and the hero takes action against it. And now the opposition has to up its game. It's not going to surrender. And then your hero has to take a fresh action in response to it. And then the opposition will up its game again, and so must your hero. When you've heard people talk about escalating conflict, this is kind of what they mean. But conflict to me is not such a helpful word, because conflict has this kind of tug of war feeling, like I say yes and you say no. Well, I say yes and you say no, and I say yes and you say no. You know, I can say yes louder each time, and you can say no louder each time, but that's not quite the same as truly escalating the action and the opposition within a scene. What you want your hero to do is to try new strategies, smarter strategies, braver strategies. You want your opposition to do the same, so that the thing not only escalates in terms of how loud everyone is yelling, but also what depths of their own character they have to reach into to come up with the next thing. Now, anybody who's watched any of the live streams here about story structure in general knows that I teach that story is a journey of transformation. And this is where the transformation happens. It's not just a question of yelling louder. It's a question of, I tried the thing that I felt comfortable doing. Now I'm going to have to try something else. Now I'm going to have to go outside my comfort zone, try something I've never tried before, right? Do something a little braver than I've ever done before. Be a little more cunning than I've ever been before. Your hero's transformation happens in these incremental leveling up experiences that are prompted by the obstacles. All right. And this is why making up obstacles is your job. So the question of on our list, question number 4 of how does your hero meet this opposition with action is not a one-off. You can explore that as like rinse and repeat, and you can keep exploring that action, opposition, until you fully explored the scene that you're drafting. Now, when we talk about drafting as a way to generate material, as a way to discover stuff, the what happens of it, I just want you to think about how much you can discover, not only about what events might happen, but about your hero's nature by what kind of actions they're able to take easily, what kind of actions they're able to take under duress, and what kind of actions they're able to take only when their backs are truly against the wall and it's the last ditch effort and the ice cream store is about to close and I've got 2 minutes left. Otherwise, I'm not going to get my ice cream. What am I able to do in the most pressured circumstances? We are different under pressure, So this is a really fruitful approach to drafting. You're going to discover your character. You're going to come up with really cool ideas for things that might happen in your story. Maybe you're going to discover the nature of an opposing character, a force of opposition, a threshold guardian, maybe even a shadow figure, somebody who might end up being a villain or the quote unquote bad guy or adversary in your story. You can learn so much just by going through the exercise of asking these questions and drafting a scene that may or may not end up in your book. But look how generative it is of really valuable material. All right, so that was number 4. Now, number 5, after this dance of hero taking action toward their goal, meeting opposition, leveling up, opposition makes a counter move, hero makes a counter move. After that little dance is done, there's some kind of outcome. Somebody prevails. Somebody gives up. Somebody is outwitted. Someone is defeated. Somebody is triumphant. Or maybe there's a stalemate. Or maybe there's some kind of, unexpected twist. But there is an outcome. We don't stay in that dance forever. And so what you need to ask yourself next is, okay, how is this going to happen? Does my hero get the ice cream or not? What's going to happen? This is the outcome of the scene. They're either going to get it or they're not, or there'll be some kind of complicated, combination of maybe I got the ice cream, but, I decided that it was a bad idea for one ice cream. What I really need to do is take more tennis lessons. I don't know. I mean, there's going to be some kind of outcome that might have shades of gray in it. But the struggle between what they want and the forces of opposition is going to come to a conclusion. All right. So what happens? What happens? Now, if I ask you this at the beginning of your drafting and your exploration, you'll be like, I don't know. But by the time you've asked yourself the other questions, why do they want the ice cream? What forces of opposition get in the way? What does my hero do about it? Right? How does my hero continue to pursue their goal in the face of this opposition? How does the opposition react to what my hero does? Now, what does my hero do? How does the opposition react to this? By the time you've been drafting with those kinds of questions in mind, you are going to have so much material that is just glittering with story energy, that you're going to have a strong impulse about what happens. You're going to know what happens. You're going to be able to make it up, not in a general way, but in a specific way. All right. So that's the fifth question. What is the outcome? The sixth and final question, right, is what are the consequences of this outcome? Does your hero get the ice cream only to drop it? Does your hero fail to get the ice cream, only to run into an unexpected person, who also missed the closing time at the ice cream parlor, but maybe who has some valuable advice or a new opportunity for our hero? Something's going to happen as a result of this drafted escapade that you've just come up with. And the consequences of what happened are going to give you a really interesting idea for what might happen next. Cause and effect. All right. So this is what happens when you draft without an attitude of, I'm just going to keep putting words on the page until something happens, or I'm just going to keep putting words on the page until I can say that I hit my daily word count goal. And I say this with all love for my NaNoWriMo people out there, because I'm recording this in November. Having a daily word count goal is fine. But what happens if you don't actually draft story and just draft words is that you're not going to end up with anything of value at the end of the month, right? What we want you to do is not to procrastinate, but to actually draft story. So these 6 questions are going to help you do that. Now, the larger picture is that as you draft with this kind of clarity of purpose in mind, you can see how quickly you're going to learn a great deal about your characters, about the world of your story, and about what might be going on. And the ideas that you're looking for about what this book might be about in a larger sense, what might be the central goal of this hero, these ideas are not going to seem so far away. They're going to be more accessible to you. You're going to have an easier time making them up. Just remember that they're not out there hiding from you. It really is your job and privilege and birthright to be able to make them up. But we tend not to be that great at making things up in a total vacuum. The minute we give ourselves a little constraint, a little writing prompt, ideas can flow. And so these 6 questions are the writing prompts that I encourage you to use when you're drafting, because at the very least, you're going to write really interesting little scenes. But that's not the point, is to write scenes that, are going to end up in the published version of the book. It's too soon for that. If you don't know what the larger picture is, it's much too soon to say this scene's going to end up in the book. But it is going to teach you so much. It's going to start generating specifics by the bushel. And once you have those specifics, they are going to lead you to invention in a way that feels so easy and so natural, one idea leading to the next, right? So that's what we want to strive for when we're truly drafting. We're drafting story, not words. If we don't know what our story is yet, we can still draft story. We can draft story-packed scenes that are going to teach us a ton about the characters and the world, and give us, a lot of good material to work from. So when you draft, this is what I mean by focusing on what happens. Focusing on what happens, not on the words. Now, I want to just give you 3 little pitfalls to think about. It's not hard, perhaps, to make note of those questions and say, okay, I'll ask them. But this is where you could go wrong. If you refuse to get specific, this is going to hold you back, okay? And it becomes very hard to make stuff up and to know what happens next if you're holding yourself in this generic place. And if you ever get stuck, sometimes it feels like counterintuitive, like, well, I'm stuck. I have no idea what happened. So how can I be more specific? Well, that's exactly the point, is that you must be specific. Pick something. Pick a trip to the ice cream store. Pick, well, it's the 4th of July. Pick, it's somebody's birthday. Pick something. You can pick something in terms of setting, in terms of timeline, in terms of character, in terms of character relationship. Are they a family? Are they best friends? Are they total strangers? You could come up with a name and say, okay, I've come up with a name. I've invented a name. It's an interesting name. Who might have a name like this? The key is to get something specific happening to get you started. So resist the urge to stay generic until you have an idea. Choose something specific and let the ideas come. That's one pitfall. Another pitfall is if you fail to make your hero active. This is something that we see a lot, which is that a writer will dutifully give the hero something to want and dutifully create an obstacle. But then they don't have the hero put up any kind of fight. They don't have the hero pursue the obstacle. The hero is thwarted instantly. And I think, it's interesting to consider why writers do this. We in real life are sometimes a little conflict avoidant. Some of us, in real life, we are sometimes taught that we have to have good manners. And if somebody says, nope, you can't do that, that we're like, oh, well, they said I couldn't do it. We tend to be a little more well-mannered and obedient, some of us, in real life. I just want you to think about the heroes of the books you love and how not well-mannered and obedient they are. When you think about the hero in a book that you love, that hero is essentially in a kind of a fight for their life. They are on the most meaningful journey of transformation of their lives. If it's a really good story, that's what it is. This is not the everyday life of a character. The story takes place to depict the most meaningful period of challenge and transformation that this character goes through. So don't compare how you behave in everyday life to how a hero of a story needs to behave. They are on a journey, right? They're in pursuit of something. And even if you don't yet have all of that, just make sure that your hero is at that level of activation. They've got to fight for what they want. They've got to go after it. They've got to use whatever skills they have to pursue it. So if you fail to make your hero active, nothing's going to happen. All right. So that defeats the purpose then of drafting to find out what happens, right? If you don't make the hero active, nothing's going to happen. Obviously, if you fail to put obstacles in the way, nothing's going to happen because the story is over. Like one day, Jane woke up and decided she wanted an ice cream cone. She went and got one, the end, right? That's not a story. It only becomes a story when something gets in her way and then the plot thickens, right? So the failure to put obstacles is another red flag. And that means they're just, not only will nothing happen, but if nothing happens, there can be no consequences. And that's kind of important as well. So if you fail to get specific, you fail to make your hero active, you fail to put obstacles in the way, nothing's going to happen. If nothing happens, there are no consequences, which means that when you ask yourself, well, what happens next? You've got nothing. You've got no place to go. So anybody who struggles to draft, who struggles with this idea of making up what happens, and who takes a kind of consolation and just saying, well, I'll just describe stuff and put words on the page until I figure it out. Just know that this kind of, prodraftination, as we're saying today, is just not the most efficient way to work. And I encourage you to instead sit down with the foreknowledge that your job is not to put words on the page. Your job is to invent what happens. That's your job when drafting. Yes, you're a writer. You're going to want to have wonderful words. You're going to want to depict your story vividly in the mind of your reader. There's so much good play with words to come. But there's no point in really putting the words first, because the story is going to be about what happens. And until you know what happens, what are your words depicting? Well, this is the question. Writers find it easier sometimes to make up words than to just ask these questions about what happens. And, there's all kinds of reasons why that may be. I've talked about some of them before. I think all I want to say today is for you to do a little soul searching, self-observation. I think all writers should make a really good practice of self-observation. And ask yourself, do I tend to do this? Do I gravitate towards saying, well, I don't know what happens next, so but I don't want to do nothing. So let me just, I don't know, put some thinking down, or maybe I'll just have a conversation happen between two characters. I'll bring in the best friend and they can banter for a little while. And then at least I've written a page of dialogue, right? And, if that's what you've got to do to get through the day, that's fine. But it's not necessarily going to teach you anything about what happens in your story. And so I encourage you that if you feel like, I don't know what to do, I think I'll just have another character come in and they can have a conversation, and be like, okay, they can have a conversation. Before you let that conversation get started, just decide what somebody wants, right? What my main character wants. Maybe the character they're going to have a conversation with is going to be the force of opposition. That's an interesting conversation to write. Pick something. Don't just waste time and pages having them rehash stuff, chit-chatting away. Try to use your time productively. Books take a long time to write, Sometimes they take a very long time to write. Sometimes they go a little more quickly. But all I can say is your drafting process is really about discovering what happens. And polishing the language is what comes next. And so the longer you put off sorting out the story, what happens, the longer it's going to take. And I do know from my own experience working with writers that the sunk cost fallacy is a real thing. If you're not familiar with that phrase, it doesn't just apply to writers, but boy, does it apply to writers. It's the idea that when you've invested a lot of time or money or resources or attention or care or whatever into something, you tend to imagine that it has value commensurate with what you've invested in it, right? And it's not so. The value of something is the value of that thing. It actually doesn't have anything to do with what you paid for it, whether you paid cash or just labor and care and, a fantasized outcome and a dream future and all the rest. It is what it is, regardless of what you paid for it. One sees this in, the real estate market, I think is where it gets talked about a lot, because you paid $400,000 for a house, and now the market says, well, it's only worth $300,000. You can't argue that's what I paid for it. The market will decide what it's worth. So that's what we mean by the sunk cost fallacy. So don't become prey to that by over-investing time, effort, labor, care into words when you haven't yet sorted out your story. And all it does is it creates pages and pages of words that you're going to find very painful to cut. And what's going to happen is you're going to be reluctant, and you're going to try to say, well, maybe I can add a subplot or write scenes that will incorporate this material, or, you're going to start to sacrifice the quality of your book in order to salvage some words that you wrote on a day when you just didn't have anything better in your head to do than put them down. So you see how it gets in the way. And we're all human. Everyone is guilty of this. No writer really says, oh, I spent 6 months working on this. I'm just going to toss it because there was the wrong second act. I'm just going to toss it. No writer's cheerful about that, But I guess what I want to communicate today is that there's no need to go through that. If you focus your whole writing process more on storytelling, if you focus your drafting process on creating material that is story-driven as opposed to language-driven. All right, that's what I've got for you today, my friends. I hope it's of value. And I have I have some great comments here from Anne. Thank you so much for leaving these comments. Let's bring some on. Anne says she kept a notebook of things that distracted or intrigued me. A great practice for every writer, by the way, Anne. It's always great to keep a notebook, but didn't know what to do with them until you had good writing prompts, the bridge from inspiration to story. That's a great way to put it. When we start to study story structure, when we start to ask questions like the questions that I shared with you all today that are designed to provoke us into thinking in story structure, all of a sudden we've got something to do with our great ideas or the things that intrigue us. And that's a really, really great one. And I see a sunk cost fallacy quote from C.S. Lewis. What a treasure. Thank you for sharing this, Anne. Quote, we all want progress, but if you're on the wrong road, progress means doing an about turn to the right road. 100% correct. I find myself in total agreement with C.S. Lewis on this point, which feels pretty good. Yeah. If you just keep doing about faces, you can do a lot of marching, but not get very far. And I don't wish that for anybody. This is NaNoWriMo month. A lot of folks are out there scribbling away, and I say Godspeed. So I offer this topic also in the spirit of wanting some of that scribbling, to be easy, playful, make you feel confident about making stuff up, I do think that sometimes when there's this excitement, this deadline, this community feeling, it can help writers get over the resistance that they might have to thinking that they can make stuff up, this sort of like shyness about it because everyone else is doing it. So why not me, right? It's just easy to get caught up in it. And so if that's you, take advantage of that. That's a great thing. That's a great thing. But remember what we've said here today. And I would love to hear more from anybody who's thought about this or who feels that their drafting process is inefficient in any way. It's supposed to be playful and exploratory, but it can still be full of purpose, right? So when I say inefficient, I really mean purposeless. It doesn't have to be efficient in the sense that what you're writing is going to all end up in the book. Chances are it's not, but it should be teaching you stuff. It should be helping you come up with details, character insights. It should be helping you come up with the kinds of things about which you can weave a story. So that's what I've got for you today. Thank you so much, those of you who are here live, those of you watching the replay. I hope everybody will subscribe to the channel. It really helps. If you like this content, please give it a thumbs up. That is also super helpful to me, and I really appreciate it. I wish you all extremely happy writing. I would love to know if you've got topics you'd like me to talk about in the future. Leave a comment. I read them all. So in the meantime, I wish you happy writing with no procrastination. All right? Have a great week, and I'll see you next time.